Folks, here we are, another video, off the cuff from the boxing source. This is a video, talking about Gennady Golovkin, and this is kind of like a shout out to, some of the guys that have been, putting in work in the YouTube boxing community, like 78 Sports TV, Brand 74. You also have Dante's Boxing Nation, among others. Boxing Ego is another one. They have been, putting up videos in reference to Gennady Golovkin, and that, he's not, what people advertise him as. And the question that I have, that I posted up as, that I'm, posting as a subject to this video is Gennady Golovkin the next Manny Pacquiao? And the reason why I ask this question is, you have Manny Pacquiao, and of course Manny Pacquiao is, went over his career. He's, won multiple belts, in multiple weight classes, but there was, the takeaway from Manny Pacquiao is, in reference to winning these belts in multiple weight classes, is that he hardly defended many of these belts. He's had the World Flyweight Championship. He's had the Super Bantamweight Championship. He's had the Featherweight Championship. He's had the Super Featherweight Championship, among others, lightweight, welterweight, super welterweight. But in a lot of these cases, with the welterweight championship, the lightweight championship, and the super featherweight championship, for example, he hardly defended those belts. So he won the belt, didn't defend it once, and he went on up to fight, another guy in the next weight class. So while he does have those multiple belts in multiple weight classes, he hardly defended those belts. And sometimes when he fought for those titles, he, fought questionable guys, as far as like if they were the best guys in their weight class. The exception may be, the fight against Juan Manuel Marquez. But somebody like a Agapito Sanchez, when he was at super bantamweight, at flyweight, when he won it from Chachai Sazakul and defended it against Gabriel Mira and Magoan Singh Sarat. I mean, we really don't know how good those guys really are. We would have to look into that. But that pretty much goes into, the thing with Manny Pacquiao, and it seems like the same thing is the case here with Gennady Golovkin. But with Gennady Golovkin, he stayed at one weight class, at middleweight. And the thing about Gennady Golovkin is, and this goes to something that Brand 74 raised in one of his videos, if you check out his channel, is that Manny Pacquiao was built as the hype to beat a guy like Floyd Mayweather. And one of the other things that Brand pointed out in reference to Manny Pacquiao is that Manny Pacquiao never really fought guys that were quote-unquote slick fighters or slick boxers. So you wouldn't see him against the likes of, a a guy like Zahir Rahim. Because if y'all remember, Manny Pacquiao and Eric Morales were scheduled to fight each other in a rematch. And before that second fight between Manny Pacquiao and Eric Morales fought Zahir Rahim. And when that fight happened, Zahir Rahim was a slick boxer. He gave Eric Morales fits and ended up losing a unanimous decision to Zahir Rahim. Now, Manny Pacquiao, I think, was in attendance in that fight that Zahir Rahim won, but everyone knew that the fight between Manny Pacquiao and Eric Morales was going to happen because it was a bigger money fight. And Manny Pacquiao ended up winning that fight. He ended up winning the third fight between him and Morales. But Manny Pacquiao never ended up fighting Zahir Rahim. So that was a kind of an indicator to Manny Pacquiao's quote-unquote avoidance of slick boxers. And Bob Arum has hinted at this multiple times when it comes to Manny Pacquiao and other fighters within the top-ranked stable that Bob Arum has had, and any other promotional companies that have fighters like Zahir Rahim or like a Floyd Mayweather. And so that's why it took so long for Manny Pacquiao to fight Floyd Mayweather, was because Bob Arum knew that Floyd Mayweather was too slick of a fighter to be beat by Manny Pacquiao. That's why they never fought each other while both were under top rank. Now, going back to Gennady Golovkin, you have this recent fight here between him and Kell Brook. And, of course, the expectation was that Gennady Golovkin was going to run over Kell Brook and basically overpower him and just blow him away. But in those first 4 rounds, what you saw Gennady Golovkin kind of going to a couple of occasions where he had to reset himself. And he got caught with a good number of counters by Kell Brook. He got caught with a good number of combinations by Kell Brook. And he ended up trying to see if he could, reach and swing for Kell Brook. And looked like he was a ordinary fighter. And by seeing that, that kind of points out to why Gennady Golovkin was not going to be matched up against Andre Ward. There are other, boxing fans that have seen and talked about this little thing with Gennady Golovkin and his difficulty with guys that could box. And a lot of people point out to his fight between him and Willie Monroe Jr. And this is something that, if Willie Monroe Jr., they say Willie Monroe Jr. had the power in his punch and things like that, Gennady Golovkin would have been in trouble. And with that being said by a lot of fans, they're now seeing how Gennady Golovkin is being matched up with certain fighters within the middleweight division. And when you see that, then you'll see that somebody that is in the ring that could box, or that could have a mixture of boxing and fighting, and has the actual size as a actual middleweight, Gennady Golovkin is not being matched up against those type of fighters. Which is weird because Golovkin is promoted by Tom Loeffler of K2 Promotions. K2 Promotions is the same company that promotes the Klitschko brothers and Cecil Ubrakis. And I point those fighters out because we know what the Klitschko brothers have done over the course of their careers. They have had big fights. They have fought fighters that are viable opponents. Their resume says that. Cecilia Brækhus has that resume that says that she has fought, the who's who in women's boxing. She's fought Mia St. John. She's fought Chevelle Hallback. She's fought, other fighters that are pretty much higher known within the women's rankings. If you check her resume, you'll see like how many high-profile fights that there are within the past, 6 to 10 fights that she's had. But when it comes to Gennady Golovkin, you really don't see that. You really didn't see that when he won his first middleweight belts. A lot of people didn't necessarily know who the opponents that Gennady Golovkin was fighting up until this point. And to say that fighters are avoiding Gennady Golovkin doesn't make any sense. If a fighter is avoided, then that particular fighter wouldn't be having fights in the first place. You can't compare someone like Gennady Golovkin, who's having fights after fights after fights, and say that he's being avoided when you have somebody like say Guillermo Rigondeaux, who is one of the most skilled fighters in the sport, and after his fight against Nonito Donaire, basically had one fight after that against Joseph Agbeko, and then didn't fight for a full year. So it's a different thing when you compare somebody like a Gennady Golovkin who has fights, and you have somebody like Guillermo Rigondeaux who has these long hiatuses between fights, who has a clear example where two fighters that held belts within his same division wouldn't fight him, and they'd rather fight each other instead, and then the winner went up in weight to fight somebody else instead of fighting Guillermo Rigondeaux. You don't have that with Gennady Golovkin. So now, after this particular fight against Kell Brook, you have more and more fighters saying that they're calling out Gennady Golovkin. You have the World Boxing Association mandating a fight between Gennady Golovkin and Daniel Jacobs to see if that fight will take place. Well, in reference to the WBA, they may order the fight, but that doesn't mean that the fight will happen. The WBA has mandated multiple fights that have the titles on the line. You've had the WBA heavyweight tournament that's supposed to happen. That was after Tyson Fury won the belts from Klitschko. And ever since then, we really haven't seen any of these fights come to fruition. Most notably, or recently, is the particular fight where you have the WBA interim champion Luis Ortiz going up against Alexander Ustinov. That has not been able to be put together properly. You have, of course, Guillermo Rigondeaux as a super champion at one point, and they weren't able to put something together between him and the regular champion, who at that point was Carl Frampton. And also, you've recently had it to where the WBA has ordered Sergey Kovalev to fight Jürgen Blammer, but you know that fight's not going to happen. So in reference to the WBA mandating this fight between Gennady Golovkin and Daniel Jacobs, it's not going to happen. I just don't see it happening. So now we're seeing Gennady Golovkin being propped up as this exciting fighter, this guy that knocks people out, this guy that looks like an unstoppable force. But there's people out there that are like me that say Gennady Golovkin has a lot of weaknesses. It's just that they haven't put the fighter in front of him to really expose all of those weaknesses and make him look bad and make him be frustrated and eventually have him losing the fight. And of course, there is that one guy that would be able to do all of that. But Tom Loeffler and Abel Sanchez did not want that fight to happen. And of course, that opponent or potential opponent's name would have been Andre Ward. And so now you have it where you'll see Gennady Golovkin try to look for another opponent. Well, basically, Tom Loeffler and Abel Sanchez look for another opponent for Gennady Golovkin. And it won't be Daniel Jacobs. It won't be Chris Eubank Jr. It probably won't even be Billy Joe Saunders. And it's not going to be Canelo Alvarez. Because Canelo Alvarez can make any fight big without Gennady Golovkin. He's going to make an example of that coming up on September 17th when he fights Liam Smith. And if he really wants to play the game with Gennady Golovkin, he can stay at 154 a little bit longer and fight one of those other guys at 154. As deep as that division is right now, Canelo can still do that. Hey, if Golovkin says he wants all the belts, then he could wait until fight Billy Joe Saunders, and if he doesn't get that fight, well, so be it. But Golovkin needs to step up his game, or Tom Loeffler and Abel Sanchez need to have him be in more challenging fights for more of the boxing public to buy into Gennady Golovkin and seeing how good he is. Because these last set of fights really haven't shown anything in reference to how good Gennady Golovkin is and why he really shouldn't be rated that high in any pound-for-pound list out there right now, just like what Carl Froch basically mentioned. So, if you have anything to say about Gennady Golovkin and this whole thing about him being kind of like the next Manny Pacquiao in a promotional sense, leave your comments. If you agree or disagree, leave your comments, and you might get a response. Until next time.